You're tuned in to the Data Masters podcast. In each episode, we dissect the complexities of data management and discuss the data strategies that fuel innovation, growth, and efficiency. We speak with industry leaders who share how their modern approaches to data management help their organizations succeed. Let's dive straight into today's episode with Anthony Dayton.
Welcome back to Data Masters. Today's episode is the ultimate guide on how to break into the data world, whether you're a fresh graduate with a blank resume or a mid-career professional looking to pivot after years in a totally different industry. My guest is Avery Smith, a top 20 data science influencer and founder of Data Career Jumpstart. He's built a massive following, helping everyone from high school math teachers to music therapists land six-figure data jobs. And we're going to cover the specific playbooks for both stages of life, both new grads, where he argues you should ignore GitHub and focus on building a portfolio that tells a real story. And we'll also talk about career switches, how to weaponize your past life experience to beat out computer science majors. And for everybody, I think Avery has a controversial take about why starting with Python is a big mistake. Avery, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Cool. So let's start with that controversial take. You argue that most people trying to break into the data world are starting with the wrong tools. And we've talked a lot on this show about Python and about why, the world of data is so anchored on this idea of writing code and specifically very much writing Python. But you don't agree with that. And in particular, you have a different set of tools or a different data stack you suggest people start with. So share your take.
I should start by saying that I love Python. It's my favorite tool to analyze data, and I think it's amazing. But like you said, I don't think if you're just starting out, you should really be learning it. And the reason why is there's just so much more low-hanging fruit than Python. When you're learning data, that's a lot of work. You have to learn different types of charts and how to clean and how to analyze and how to do statistical models and on your data. And that's a lot in of itself. And then on top of that, if you're going to learn Python, you're also learning about programming, which in itself is like a whole language and a whole thing separate to learning the data concepts. And so to me, it feels like, man, that's a lot to learn how to program and all these data concepts at the same time. And so my point of view is okay, what if we just simplify it? We just focus more on the data concepts first. And we do easier tools like Tableau or Excel, which you're already familiar with, or even SQL. SQL is hard as well. It's a programming language, but it's kind of easier than Python, to be honest. There's just a lot more structure to it for the majority of the time. And you can honestly do less with SQL than you can with Python. So I'm a big fan of Python, but it just feels it feels very overwhelming when you're just getting started. So I'm like, okay, let's just start with something a little bit easier and work our way into Python down the road.
Right. I think there's also the sense that when you focus and start with Python, you're in a way jumping over the real work of being a data analyst, which is, shocker, analyzing data. So you get wound around the axle of trying to, get your Python code to be syntactically correct and lose sight of the question that you're trying to ask and answer with the data.
100%. And I have a job board that I run. And so I have access to all of the job descriptions. And so I've gone through 10,000 job descriptions. Now, these are for what I would consider data analyst jobs. These aren't like data scientist jobs. So these jobs are I consider financial analyst, pricing analyst, business analyst, healthcare analyst, business intelligence engineer. I consider all of those kind of derivatives of the job family of data analyst. And when you look at that, Python and the number of times it's actually mentioned in the job descriptions is behind SQL, Excel, Tableau, Power BI, then Python. So it's fifth, and it's only required in 16% of the jobs. So it's just there's so many things you can be analyzing without Python, and there's so many jobs you can be qualified for without Python that the learning curve, which is quite steep for Python, just I just don't know upfront if the investment in learning Python is worth it. I do think in the long term it's worth it. Like I think you should learn Python eventually, but when you're just getting started and you're struggling to land a job, I just don't know if it's the best investment.
Yeah, and there's not a huge number of things you can't do in a tool like Excel or a BI tool that, clearly there are some things you can do in Python, but even, I mean, taking a simple example, you can run a regression in Excel. Um, the real question is, why are you running the regression? Like, what question are you trying to answer that technology is the appropriate solution to the problem? And if you've skipped over that, then you're just, in my example, running regressions for regression's sake.
We don't want to be doing data for data's sake at all. Like, and also we don't want to be in our analysis, we don't necessarily want to choose the sexier way to look more sexy, right? Like you said, like we need to care about the business results, the organization results, whether that's saving time, saving money, saving lives. Like that's really what we should be in data for, not for doing Python because it's fun. Although it is fun, and I think it's worth learning in the long term. But yeah, 100%. We don't want to just be doing data for funsies.
So we've also, I think, so far in the conversation, been a little loose in our language. We've both used the term data analyst and data scientist, and we've, at least I have, been mixing the two up a little bit. I think there's a sense that being a data scientist sounds cooler. Who wouldn't want to be a scientist? And presumably, you could probably tell me with the job board data whether it actually pays well. But you spend a lot of energy encouraging people, especially initially, to go after data analyst jobs. And so maybe start with what's the distinction between these two roles, and then following on, why your view is that people should be going after these analyst roles to start.
It's interesting, the data world. All the data job titles are a little bit fuzzy, so there's going to be some overlap. In fact, I think his title, it was one of the bigger car dealerships, like this car brand you've definitely heard of, and I think he owned a couple dealerships on the east side of the United States. And one day he reached out to me on LinkedIn, and he's like, "Hey, I'm posting this job description. Will you take a look at it and let me know what you think? Maybe you know someone who's a good fit." And he had titled it data scientist, but like all the descriptions were like data analyst. And so there's definitely people and jobs out there who conflate the two. But for me, the definition is basically most of the time what direction you're facing. I think that's the easiest way to look at it.
Interesting.
Data analyst is going to be doing more of like the descriptive and the diagnostic analytics. So that's like what happened in the past and maybe why. And a data scientist is going to be looking more in the future, predicting the future, predictive analytics. So what's going to happen? And then prescriptive analytics, how can we make it happen? So yeah, it's a lot easier to tell what happened in the past than it is in the future. So that data scientists often do get paid more because that is a more difficult skill set to do. So that's my definition, is just kind of like, what way are you facing? Are you just kind of looking at what happened in the past? Or are you kind of looking more at what's going to happen in the future? Or are you trying to create models to get an ultimate outcome that you actually want? So a good example of what a data scientist would do is like, what order do we show your TikTok videos? When you open up Netflix, what are we actually showing to you? That's like trying to get users to stay on the platform. And that's a data scientist problem versus a data analyst problem, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that distinction because I think it's so easy for people to understand. And I also acknowledge and appreciate this distinction you're drawing between the job poster, if I can say it that way, and the job receiver. Because I do think there's the sense that people who are posting jobs, like, why wouldn't I want a scientist over an analyst? Like, that sounds better. But if the problem I'm trying to solve is a descriptive problem, if I'm trying to understand my business better, I could almost certainly get away with somebody with a set of analyst skills. Is that the right way to think about it?
100%. And on my podcast, I recently just made an episode about why I wouldn't maybe necessarily try to go from scratch to a data scientist in the next year or so. And one of the reasons is I think we're in a really interesting economy right now where like S&P 500 still going up, but like we're feeling kind of tight and it's like what's happening. And I think a lot of companies that maybe don't have like, let's say, that don't use machine learning as like a core value proposition. So like Netflix, like that's really important to them. Instagram, it's really important to them. Like the algorithm, anything that has like an algorithm, they're going to need machine learning, and data scientists are going to be doing the machine learning. Let's just say ignore like those more techie companies. I think a lot of companies are going to feel tight. And for me, you can get quicker wins with data analytics because it's just easier to do. Like looking at what happened in the past, a lot of companies aren't doing a good enough job at that right now. And it's a quick win for them. Data science, where you're trying to predict the future, trying to do something a little bit more difficult, like a lot of data science projects fail. And I think when companies are like feeling kind of stressed, you don't want failed projects. So I'm not sure about this. This is just my prediction that like data scientists' roles might stall a little bit next year as we kind of feel in this tight environment. While like data analyst roles, it's a little safer bet, I guess. You can get a little bit more of a proven ROI. The ROI might not be as big, but it might be more stable.
And so, and that's from the perspective of the employer, but thinking from the perspective of a new hire, or sorry, a new grad rather, somebody who's just entering the workforce, or to the earlier, or to where I started us, for somebody who's mid-career or making a switch, I guess you would say positioning in that analyst vein, there are more jobs, they're easier to get, they're easier to do. You're going to be more successful in that first role.
That's exactly what I believe. And I learned this the hard way actually, because truthfully, I kind of went from being a chemical lab technician to a data scientist. I kind of jumped straight into the data science position. And when I was like, man, this is awesome, I want to start teaching other people how to do it. I started like a boot camp, and I ran it for a year. And I had mixed results. I had some students who had landed jobs and some who hadn't. And when I did the analysis and looked at like, okay, who actually landed data jobs? Was it the smartest people? Was it the people who were best at SQL? Did they have the best Python project? The answer was no. It was the people who were aiming for the data analyst roles. And so going from zero to data scientist proved really difficult. And so I ended up changing my whole philosophy of like, okay, I'm not going to teach people to go from zero to data scientists. I'm going to teach them to go from zero to like one of these data analyst roles. And then from there, it's like the hub of the data world, almost the tech world, like where you can become a senior data analyst or a data scientist or a data engineer down the road. But like, let's just get your foot in the door the easiest way possible. And once you have a data job, life is easier.
I love that. And actually, that's a really nice way of thinking about it, which is if you want to be a data scientist, get your foot in the door as an analyst and then prove your metals, right? Versus getting into a tough situation where you've taken that data scientist role and maybe you're not ready, you don't have the skills, and certainly you haven't proven yourself within that organization. And that's a recipe for, a tough conversation.
Yeah, that's not a place I'd rather work up. And one like easy way to land a role that maybe you're not even qualified for is to pivot internally. That's the only reason I went from chemical lab technician to data scientist, because it's because I didn't switch companies. So my company was like, oh, Avery's already a really hard worker. I was super underpaid at the time, so they're like, he's great value. Like, yeah, this is a change that we're okay making because he's already proven his worth. So I personally rather always try to do an internal pivot because you don't even have to apply for the job. The job kind of applies for you.
Yeah, well, and very much to your earlier commentary about where perhaps the economy is going, these sound like a super smart, super grounded strategy. So you talked a little bit about the coaching business you've been developing. You also have a very specific methodology, which I love, this idea of the SPN method: skills, portfolio, and network. And you also make this point, which I appreciate, and which is that people overemphasize or spend energy and time on the skills portion of skills, portfolio, and network. And you argue the other two are actually not just equally important, but in fact, more important. I might add that this potentially could be a function of the fact that we get a lot of kind of overachieving people who've spent a lot of time in academics as students, where skills and skill assessment is really the primary mechanism of getting feedback. And so no wonder they spend so much energy sort of building skills. But enough about tell me to start, go backwards. Tell us a little bit about the methodology and why you think uh, the P and N are more important than the S.
Yeah, I wish we lived in a world where it was just like the most skilled person gets the job, but it's just not how reality works. You work on it right. That is kind of how school works. I never thought of it that way. But in the real world, it's not the best product that is the most popular. It's not necessarily the best singer who has the most streams, right? There's other factors to it. And the same is landing any job, especially data jobs. So your skills are important. You need to have the skills. But the way that you're presenting your skills and the opportunities you have are coming from the other two parts of the method. So there's the S, skills, important. The portfolio P and the network N are the other two parts of the equation. The portfolio is what actually is like the evidence that you can do what your resume says that you can do. Because it's like if you're like, yeah, I can code in Python. A recruiter or a hiring manager, especially when you're a new grad or you're a career switcher, is going to be like, okay, well, where's the evidence, right? Like, show me the money, show me where you can actually prove it. And you're like, I took a class or something, right? A portfolio is more tangible. It's like undeniable. Hey, look, your job description asked for, can someone look at marketing data and be able to choose like the most optimal channel to increase ad spend on? I have a project where I literally have done this for a different company. And the recruiter and hiring manager have to be like, whoa, you're right. Like this, I can't deny what you're showing me. So it's the evidence. And then even if you have the evidence, even if you have the skills, if you don't have the network or you don't have the job application and the career skills to get yourself in front of the right people, it's not going to do you any good. Like for example, let's say I'm in my office right here, right? Let's say I cured cancer. Absolutely amazing. If I don't tell people about it, like nothing's going to change in the world. I'm not going to make an impact. I'm not going to be able to capitalize off of my invention. Like you need to be in front of the right people. You need to have the right opportunities come before you. And if you don't actually make an effort to do that, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. So I sometimes think about the skills as if it's a poker game, it's the ante. Like it's enough to get in the game. To your point, if you don't have them, you're not playing that hand, you're sitting out. So it's not an excuse for ignoring the skills, but it's also important to recognize, very much to your point, that the most skilled person doesn't get the job. But let's dig into this portfolio question a little bit. Um, what is the best way for people to show off their portfolio? Like, do I create a bunch of GitHub repositories and send people a link to GitHub, or how do I get people to know that I've done this thing?
Well, let's split it into the two categories, the new grads and the career switchers.
Yeah.
If you're like a current student, or let's say you're a new graduate, what I did when I was in college is I literally had a binder with pictures of like, hey, I made this graph. Hey, this is like the end results of this machine learning algorithm I made. And I would physically show people in-person interviews. I think that's really impactful because once again, it's more tangible. It's like, hey, look at you literally can't ignore this. It's right here in front of you. So I think that's a fun way. But I think a lot of the world and the way we're moving is obviously more digital. So I think having some sort of online repository of your projects that's tangible is good. There's lots of different options you can do. GitHub is probably historically the most famous, but I have kind of a hot take where I actually think when you're first starting out, let's say you're not actually coding that much, because GitHub is built for collaboration between coders and version control. It's not built to be a portfolio. You can hack it to be a portfolio, but it's not actually built that way. And in fact, I think GitHub admits this because they built a new product called GitHub Pages that is more of like a showcase type tool inside of the GitHub platform. So I'm personally not a huge fan of GitHub. I think it's a little bit clunky as a portfolio, but like doing something like GitHub Pages or using Squarespace or Wix or Card is what I recommend a lot of the time. Just these simple website builders, drag and drop website builders. I think those can be great. But you could even do it with like LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn, you can kind of do some workarounds in LinkedIn where they have a project section you could utilize. Or my personal favorite is we create what's called LinkedIn articles, and then we basically pin them in our featured section on our LinkedIn profile. So if you open up one of my students' LinkedIn profile, you'll see their profile picture, their headline, their about section. But the next thing you see is like 7 pinned projects at the top, basically like, this is my SQL project, this is my Excel project. So once again, trying to get the evidence in front of people as quickly as possible.
You also make an important distinction there with your example of the printed graphical output. And just to contrast that with GitHub, I think another reason GitHub doesn't work is you're asking the reader to do the work. Like, here's a bunch of code I wrote. You should assume that the result of all this code is this great insight. Almost by definition, the code isn't run, it's the code. In contrast, what you're showing with the chart in your printed example is the outcome of this analysis is this set of insights that I've clearly summarized for you, hopefully visually, which, by the way, is what your customer wanted. They did not want your GitHub code. They want, or their code, let's just not pick on GitHub. They don't want your code. They want the output of the code. And when you walk into an interview and you show the code, you're effectively telling the interviewer, you need to do some work to believe me.
100%. It's really hard on GitHub. You have to like basically make a really good README file and like screenshot a bunch of stuff and upload the file, the output onto GitHub, for example. But yeah, 100%. Once again, going back to, we're not writing SQL code to write SQL code. We're writing SQL code for the business decisions we're making that the code outputs. It's really the value in any sort of Python code or SQL code is not even the code, not even the results from the code. It's the insights derived from the results. So if you can try to show that you can do that, all three of those things, I think you're going to put yourself a leg up against the competition.
Yeah, and then maybe to beat this one to death a little bit, the visual dimension. I think there's also this tendency, and this is admittedly a bit of a psychosis of data analysts and data people, is they want to give answers as data. And my experience of most executives is a wall of numbers is overwhelming and boring, and a bar chart, or whatever, hopefully not a pie chart, but the bar chart is like a really good way of saying, like, here's an insight.
Yeah, it's really powerful. The visualization's a great thing to make your projects really stand out.
So let's shift a little bit to this idea of the network. So in a way, that's maybe a bit more of the surprise to me. I think one angst that, frankly, whether you're a new grad or a career transitioner, I hear this most acutely from new grads because they feel like they don't have a professional network. I mean, almost by definition, they've been in school. And then the career switcher almost certainly would say, I have a network, but it's the wrong network. I'm trying to get into data. My network is in chemicals, in your example, or whatever the industry is I'm in, and that doesn't help. And so I'm starting from this sense of like the lonely person on an island in the middle of the ocean. How do you think about the network?
I'm going to try a new concept on this podcast. So hopefully I haven't thought this all the way out. So hopefully it goes well. But there's only really 4 different ways to network, and there's 2 variables on each way. So think of it as like a matrix. You can network one-to-one or one-to-many, and you can network privately or you can network publicly. And there's kind of 4 different combinations here. The easiest the easiest really depends on your personality. It all depends on you and what you're comfortable doing. And I tried to teach all 4 of these methods in my boot camp, and then students can select which one matches to them. So like one really easy way, in my opinion, to network one-to-many publicly is to post on LinkedIn, to just document your journey. And then all of a sudden people will start to notice you. I started just to talk about data when I worked at ExxonMobil. So I was already a data scientist. I was already in the industry. I was just talking about what I was working on and what I was studying on my own. And that changed my life because one day a private equity, VP of a private equity company reached out to me and was like, hey, would you ever want to do consulting for us? And I was like, yeah, sure. Like, that's great. And so that's kind of what started my freelancing business, which allowed me to quit my corporate job and kind of start my own business. So that works really well. But if you're like, oh, I'm terrified of posting on LinkedIn, that sounds really not fun, then maybe like doing like more one-to-one would be more your avenue. So like, for example, one really easy thing to do is just like look to the neighbor that lives to the left of you, look to the neighbor that lives to the right to you, and just write down what they do and where they work and answer one question. Does their company hire data people? If so, then reach out to them and be like, hey, I know you work for this company. Do you like it? And that's like such an easy question just to start the conversation. And then eventually you can be like, do you know any data people at your company? And the answer could be yes. And then you can be like, oh, well, can you introduce me to them? Can I maybe talk to them about like what it's like? The answer may be no. And you can just say, well, do you know like a recruiter who might know someone that does data at your company? And those two avenues I think are two, just depending on your personality type, two really easy ways, no matter where you're at in life, to start do some sort of networking.
Yeah, and I think there's also the sense that networking needs to result in a job with the person that you networked with on the first conversation you have with them, that very day. And I think disabusing yourself of that expectation ratchets the pressure down. So I love this idea of reaching out to someone and saying, do you like your job? For one thing, there's probably an insight there, which is, maybe their company they work for is horrible and you wouldn't want to work there. So just immediately learn something. But more likely, they like their job and they're excited to talk to you about it and want to share that insight with you. What you didn't do is say, I know you work at company X. I'm trying to get into data science or be a data analyst. Here's a job posting. Can you get me this job? Like that's a heavy, tall ask. Whereas, do you like your job is a low ask.
Starting with a low ask is really important, because it brings the pressure off, I think, of everyone. I do think though, like if there's an open job at the company and you're actually tight with this person, like you're actually friends, I think it's worth reaching out there. But yeah, if it's like someone who's kind of random, you should. There's a really good maxim in like career searching and career advice, and it's if you ask for a job, you'll get advice in return. If you ask for advice, you'll get a job. And so if you can really start and be like, hey, what would you do if you're in my situation, can really open the door down the road for those types of jobs.
100%. The other thing I always sort of suggest, so I love this distinction between one-to-many versus one-to-one, and public versus private. The other piece that I often suggest to people is end every conversation with a question about who else you could talk to. So if you think about it as like a network effect, you talk to one person, they introduce you to two, each of those people introduce you to two. Soon you'll be talking to every person on planet Earth. Just mathematically, we can work it out. Like these doubling factors are very powerful. Even if that person introduces you to one other person, like that's still powerful. So, think about it as building this tree of relationships where in a way, almost, you're not expecting any one of them to turn into a job. What you're hoping for them to do is to turn into another conversation.
Yeah, that can be really powerful. I interviewed a guy on my podcast maybe 2 years ago, and I can't remember exactly why he cold messaged this person at this company. If he was just doing informational interviews, just like, hey, like, do you like your job type thing, or if there was already a job up. I don't think the job was up. I think he basically reached out to this person and was like, I want to learn more about your job. I'm interested in your role. Would you be willing to spend 10 minutes with me? And then he asked that question at the end, hey, who else should I meet? And it was, oh, you should meet my coworker. And eventually, when a job did open up at this company, he had already talked to like 5 of the data analysts on the team. And so when the job opened up, he applied, they saw his name and he was like, oh, we're just going to hire this guy. And it was easy from there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think these things are very easy to understand when you look back on them. Like it's very easy to draw the path from where you were to where you are today, looking backwards. But it's effectively impossible to draw it the other way. The serendipity that, these kinds of relationships, the hops that you take through the network, you'll never you'll never figure it out ex post. You have to look at it backwards.
100%.
So you've been doing this for a while. Sometimes I think, we've been talking in a way quite theoretically. Maybe you share a story. I think you have such great stories about, people, maybe help people who are listening feel the art of the possible. Like, yeah, like I'm doing this and I want to get into the data world. I think it's interesting. It's the future, et cetera. Like, are there, I'm sure there's some great stories of people who've made a transition that you've helped.
Yeah, we try to help as many people as we can. We've had some pretty remarkable changes, and I try to share them on my podcast, Data Career Podcast, as well. But I'll share some snippets, some fun stories with you quickly. So, my favorite people to work with are actually like high school math teachers because they know math already. So the math in data is not intimidating to them. They're great communicators. And being a teacher, and I can say this because my mom's a teacher, being a teacher kind of sucks. So like the bar to beat a teaching career, I mean, they're amazing. We need teachers in the US, but like you just have to dedicate more than 40 hours a week and you have to be in person. So I've had a high school math teacher go from making, I don't know, let's say $75,000, probably working, 40 to 50 hours a week to about 120,000. So not quite double, but pretty close after my program. And once again, she was very skilled. She went through my program. She built the portfolio. But what's the third part? She needed a network. So she actually somehow knew, or her cousin knew a recruiter that worked for a really large bank. And so she ended up connecting with this recruiter and landing this senior data analyst job at this large bank institution. So that was awesome because like just imagine like all of a sudden, oh, and she works hybrid in the office, I think once a month. So I mean, imagine going from basically, let's just call it doubling, even though it's not quite, but almost doubling your salary, like extra $50,000 a year. All of a sudden, you don't have to commute to work anymore, and you're doing something you really enjoy, and you never get in trouble with parents or principals or something like that. Like that's like a huge win, and it's totally in reach for not only teachers but a lot of different professions who don't really like their job right now.
Yeah, I love that. And exactly. Like, yeah, yeah. And I also particularly love the, what was it, the cousin of the, person at the company. Like, and it's a perfect example of that you can't plot these things out going forward. You can only tell that story looking back on it, right? Because you can only be like, oh, this is, of course it worked out that way. And so, but if you'd asked her, before she engaged, like, yeah, who in your familial network it works, is the right person for you, she'd be like, I have no idea. Right. But you got to kind of go through the process. So I want to ask you a tough question. And it's sort of the elephant in the room we haven't talked about, which is, and which I feel like has to come up on every pod. It's like a podcasting rule that we have
Yeah.
to bring up AI.
Yep.
But I think there's some particular relevance in this context because I think that there's a legitimate fear or concern that in particular, these entry level analyst and even data scientist jobs are going to be replaced by AI. That the idea of a machine being able to write basic SQL or even, heaven forbid, basic Python, uh, you know, even going in and doing basic Excel formulas, these are things that reasonably AI can do, or at least can do reasonably well. Um, um, Maybe this is all a terrible, terrible idea that, the world of entry level data analyst and data scientist, even data scientist work is going to be replaced by, chat GPT or whatever. Or maybe it's Claude, but I don't know. What do you think?
It's a really interesting question and obviously very important to think about and talk about. It's I want to first and preface and say I don't think actually anyone really knows what's 100% going to happen, and I don't either. But here's my 2 cents. One, I think AI kind of existed before AI did in the data world. Like for example, one of my things I did as a consultant was I made like really smart web apps for companies. So a lot of the times we'd spin these up in Streamlit or we'd use like Dash from Plotly and create these web apps for these small companies that did machine learning for them, displayed some data. It was like basically like, hey, you do this repetitive analysis task, we automate it for you, right? AI didn't exist back then, but we'd always start from a template, an existing template, right? And we'd copy and paste it, and then we'd make all the changes. And that's kind of how I see AI working, where it's like, okay, I know I want to do this in general. I'm going to have AI try to do it, and it's going to get me 50% of the way there. So the way I look at it is more like I don't know if you're a Mario Kart player, but like in Mario Kart, if like you can like hit certain items and they will change how your car is going. And I see it like as the mushroom. It's the thing that makes you faster. I don't see it as the thing that replaces you. Now, will it be good enough to replace people? Maybe. But I think that there's so much untapped data problems and solutions at every existing company. Like I worked for ExxonMobil, one of the biggest companies in the world. I can tell you that like there were so many data projects we wanted to do, but like we couldn't feasibly get to them all. So I don't think it's going to like lower headcount. I think it's going to increase efficiency. That being said, also like if you try to replace employees with AI, like I think there's going to be a lot of issues. I think there's going to be a lot of problems. I use a lot of AI tools, and a lot of times they suck. A lot of the times they're like so like I want to please you that it'll do anything to try to do what I ask it to. So, for example, and I'll try not to name names here, but like there's certain tools I use that definitely are big players in the AI world. I'll say, hey, do a regression with this. It looks at the data and it's like, I don't really know what to do, but I don't want to disappoint Avery. So I'm going to create a faux data set and just do it on the faux data set. And I'm not going to tell him that it's on the faux data set. And so like, obviously if that happens in production, you're kind of screwed. And so the last thing I'll kind of say is like, I definitely see AI being used. I see it being used more as a tool. I think interesting analogies to kind of look at in other worlds. So like a radiologist, like machine learning has been really good at detecting benign or cancerous tumors for years, and yet we still have radiologists, right? They still need to be looking and confirming what the data is actually telling us. Like we have robotics surgeons that still require surgeons. I think I'm not like a pilot, but like don't planes like kind of fly themselves now? And yet we have 2 pilots on every flight that we're on. Like that's kind of where I see the furthest that this data thing will go on is maybe we become more of like we do the beginning and the end and we kind of supervise the middle, but I don't see it replacing people personally.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And I think also to the earlier commentary, if the energy and focus of people who try to get into this space is on understanding, interpreting, presenting, and communicating results and information, then the act of writing the code, writing the Excel formula, formatting the chart, like those are things which if you can speed them up and use tooling to get them done, that actually goes to improve your efficiency and in a good way puts your emphasis on the uniquely human piece that you can do, which is like get the recipient of this to understand it, to make the business change they need to make, whatever the action that comes out of that, which speaks very much to where we started this conversation about how you think about portfolios and how you think about even the work you're doing. Like don't jump into the tooling because maybe the tooling is going away. Maybe no one ever will write Python code again because the machine will generate the code. But communicating, interpreting, challenging the results to your point about making up data, like probably a good idea to look and see what the code's doing. Because if it's generating a data set, then that's probably bad, right? And you should be savvy enough to understand that.
100%. When we were at Exxon, we were building tools for, let's say, more business side of the business, right? And our tools would tell them what to do, what was optimal. There was still a lot of convincing we had to do. Like, this is why it's saying like the explainability behind it all. And like, there's so much more to making a decision other than this is what the data says to do. We're going to do that. That's not how the majority of the world works.
Yeah, just watch the movie Moneyball and you'll be convinced that it takes a lot of energy to convince an organization to stop doing the wrong thing and start doing the right thing. Well, look, Avery, it's been a pleasure. And what I appreciate out of this conversation is how absolutely practical it is. I think anyone either entering a career or thinking about a career switch into the data space would be well served to take your advice and think about the things you've shared on this podcast. So I really appreciate you making time and sharing your thoughts and expertise.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us for the latest episode of the Data Masters podcast. You'll find links in the show notes to any resources mentioned on today's show. And if you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe so you never miss an episode.